Welcome to a review of biology in healthcare. This video is to help you to understand the stage number 3, support, movement, transport, and defense. In this stage, we will learn about different systems of our body, their structure, function, composition, and some diseases that can affect them. I recommend you to have your book and your notebook with you, so in this way you can take some notes. Let's start.
Skeletal system. It is involved in body locomotion and provides the basic morphology of the body that allows us to maintain in 2 feet. I suppose when you hear skeletal system, you think it is only about bones, right? But no, it is also composed by joints and ligaments. The skeletal system has a lot of functions, for example, support our organism or protect our vital organs, for example, the lungs and heart. It is the main reservoir of ions too and contains the red bone marrow. The structure of the skeletal system is divided into 2 regions, appendicular and axial. The first one is composed by 126 bones. In this region are included bones like extremities, clavicles, and pelvic bone, besides others. Then we have the axial skeleton, which is composed by 80 bones. The skull, face, and ribs are examples of bones that compose this region. I mentioned bone, but what is a bone? It consists of bone tissue, which is a specialized type of connective tissue made of cells, the osteocytes, surrounded by a hardened matrix, which is the matrix bone. According to the organization of the elements, there are 2 types of bone, the compact or cortical and the spongy or trabecular. Have you ever wondered how many bones you have? Well, the answer depends on your age, because an adult has 206 bones, while children have 300 bones. This is because during growing, some bony pieces are fused. As I mentioned before, we have 2 types of bone, the compact and the spongy. Let's start with the compact, which is composed by osteons or Harvesian systems. This is constituted by the Harvest canal. Through this tunnel, the vascular elements that supply the bone pass. Around it are lamella, containing bone cells, whether osteocytes or osteoblasts. The channels are connected to the Volkmann channels. You can see them in the image. Now we have the spongy bone, which is composed by lamella. That is bone tissue but not in osteon form. A spongy bone consists of trabecular bones. The characteristic of this type of bone is that between the trabecula are large spaces in which other tissues are lodged, for example, red bone marrow. Spongy bones are not as strong as the compact. The components of the bone are the same. The difference is the way in which osteocytes are organized. You already know what is a bone, its types, besides other things. But how the bone is formed? The answer is by a process known as ossification or osteogenesis. 4 different types of cells participate in this process. The first one is the osteogenic. These cells are capable of developing into osteoblasts and finally in osteocyte. Then osteoblasts, which are the cells that produce the bone matrix. Osteocyte is the mature bone cell, and the osteoclasts, which are the cell responsible for bone remodeling. Other component of the ossification is the bone matrix, which is an special tissue because it's hard and resilient at the same time. There are 2 types of ossification. The endochondrial, this process occurs during the embryonic development, and the intermembrane. Here, the ossification is produced by a membrane. At the beginning of this review, I told you the skeletal system is not just bones. It also has other components. Well, joints are one of that components. A joint is the union between two bones. Its function is to allow the functional movement of the bone. There are three types of joints: fixed, mobile, and semi-mobile. In the first type, the bones cannot move, for example, those in the skull. In the case of mobile joints, allow wide movements, such as those of heels, shoulders, and knees. In the last one, semi-mobile joints are those that allow small movements, as the case of the spine. Well, another component of skeletal system is cartilage. This is a tissue that covers the ends of the bones in a joint. It is firm and flexible at the same time. Its function is allow some bones to slide over others and protect them from rubbing each other. Cartilage is also present in parts like nose and trachea. To finish with the skeletal system, we are going to talk about the diseases that can affect it. The first one is the fracture, which is defined as the loss of bone continuity. It can occur in any segment of the bone. Fractures can be partial or complete, and also if the skin that covers the fracture is injured, it is said the fracture is open or exposed. Then, osteoporosis is the loss of bone mass. It mainly affects spongy bone. With this disease, bones are prone to fractures. The more common fractures due to this pathology are hip, spine, and wrist. In bone cancer occurs when bone cells begin to grow out of control and displace normal cells. There are three types of cancer: osteosarcoma, chondrosarcoma, and Ewing sarcoma. Now we are going to start with the muscular system. Like the skeletal system, its main function is allow us to move. It is made of muscle cells and connective tissue sheets that link it to the locomotor system. There are three different types of muscles. The first one is the skeletal. Its function is voluntary. You can find it in all muscle masses that participate in locomotion and maintaining posture. The second one is the cardiac. Its function is involuntary. That means it does by itself and doesn't need any sign to move. And its location is in the heart. And the last one is the smooth. Its function is as cardiac, involuntary, and its location is in the wall of hollow viscera, for example, the intestine. Muscle cells are the components of the muscular system. Their main characteristic is their contractile capacity. That means by their possibility to shorten their length and then return to their original form. According to the organization of their contractile apparatus are classified into two types: striated and smooth. The first one you can find in skeletal and cardiac muscles, and the second one in smooth muscles. We are talking about the locomotor apparatus. This is the reason why now we are going to focus on the skeletal striated muscle fibers, which are elongated and multinucleated cells of cylindrical morphology. The cytoplasm of each skeletal striated muscle cell contains the contractile apparatus, constituted by actin and myosin, both from the sarcomere, which is the functional unit of the striated muscle. Each muscle has millions of sarcomeres. The contraction-relaxation cycle in a skeletal muscle begins when cell responds to nervous stimulus. Myosin sticks to the actin, and this one moves over the myosin, shortening the sarcomere. Then, the relaxation requires ATP energy, allowing the thin filaments to slide back to their original position. There are some structures that help the muscular system to connect with the skeletal system to allow us to move. The first one is the tendon, which connects the muscles with the bones. And the second one is the ligament, which bind the bones to each other. To perform different movements, muscles work in groups to control the movements of the joints. These movements are classified in agonist or main muscle. This movement produces most of the force during the muscle action. Synergies. It helps the main muscle to achieve more power. Antagonist. This movement opposes the main muscle. Sometimes the muscle relaxes for the main muscle takes control. And fixer. It prevents a bone from moving to allow the movement of something else. Muscle diseases affect the muscles, can cause weakness, pain, or even paralysis. They have different causes, for example, genetics, cancer, inflammation, infections, medication, diseases of the nerves, besides others. Here we have some examples of diseases and injuries. The first one is muscular dystrophy. This causes muscle weakness and loss of muscle mass. Myostasis is an inflammation of muscles that are used to move the body. There is a type of cancer, its name is soft tissue sarcoma. This affects soft tissue. Then we have sprain. It's an injury of ligament caused by excessive distension, torsion, or tearing. Luxation. It's an injury that involves a change in the position of the joints. And the last one is tear. It involves a muscle cell breaking. Sometimes muscles have involuntary movements, which are better known as cramps. They usually are painful and their intensity is variable. Occurs when the muscle is subject to a prolonged effort or lacks adequate oxygenation, besides other reasons. There are some advices that you can follow to prevent them, for example, to do a preparing stretching exercises. There are some factors that increase the risk of software stimulation in the muscular system. To decrease the risk of software 1, avoid the next behaviors. Do an inadequate warm-up or not perform it. Perform physical activity without adequate advice. And remember that muscles require periods of rest, at least 48 hours between workouts. Now we are going to talk about the gumentary system, which is also related with the other system that we saw before. The gumentary system comprises skin, hair, sweat glands, and nails. The skin is a barrier that covers our body. It is considered an immunological organ and is also the largest organ in the body. It has approximately an area of 2 square meters and weighs between 3 and 4 kilograms. The gumentary system has a lot of functions. Most of them are related with protection. For example, mechanical protection. That means that protect us to the entry of pathogens. Then biological protection, because produce different types of cells that help us to protect from the UV rays. Also, it is in charge of the regulation of body temperature by producing sweat. It's related with the sense perception too, because it has sensory receptors that allow us to feel pain, pressure, and temperature. Other function of this system is hydroelectric regulation, because avoid the exit of tissue fluid and dehydration. Synthesis of vitamin D is another function of this system. This is important to calcium absorption. It has an immunological function too, because protect us to the environment. Now we are going to talk about the structure of the skin. It's divided into 3 layers: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Let's learn about them one by one. Epidermis is the most superficial layer of the skin that is in contact with the environment. There are 4 types of cells in the epidermis. Keratinocytes, which constitute the 90% of the cells of the epidermis. Their function is synthesize the keratin. Melanocytes. These cells transfer melanin to the adjacent keratinocytes. Langerhans cells. These are cells originated in the bone marrow. They participate in the immune response. And the Merkel cells, they are on the fingertips and the lips. Next layer of the skin is the dermis. It's below the epidermis. It's made of connective tissue and is divided into 2 types: papillary dermis, which has an abundant loose connective tissue and large number of blood cells, and the second one, reticular dermis, which consists of dense connective tissue and fewer blood vessels. In the dermis, we can find the pilosebaceous complex and the sweat glands. The first one is constituted by hair follicles that origin the hair through the skin and sebaceous glands that secrete sebum. And we also have the sweat glands, which are divided into types. Eccrine sweat, they produce sweat when the temperature increases, and the other type is apocrine sweat glands. They are related with the hair follicle and its function starts during puberty. And the last layer of the skin is the hypodermis. It is under the dermis. Its function is work as energy storage and also preserve the body heat. Some diseases can affect our skin, for example, skin cancer and acne. Skin cancer is one of the most common. There are some types of this kind of cancer: carcinoma, epidermoid, and melanoma. The most frequently is the carcinoma. It is originated in the epidermis. It is slow-growing and locally invasive and destructive. The epidermoid occurs in keratinocytes, is more common in men. It's believed it's caused by the exposure of the tanning beds. And the most aggressive is the melanoma. It can occur anywhere on the body and appears at the early age. Another common disease is the acne. This affects the sebaceous glands and hair follicles. It is a chronic inflammation skin disease. Injuries occur most frequently on the face, neck, back, and shoulders. It is more common during adolescence and is associated with the hormonal changes, the consumption of certain medication, and inheritance. There are some advices that we can follow in order to prevent a skin disease. For example, do not expose for a long time to the sun. Avoid tanning beds. Consume fruits and vegetables rich in vitamin A, C, and D. And clean the skin. Now we are going to talk about one of the most important systems in our body, the circulatory. It is made of blood, heart, and blood vessels. Its function is to bring oxygen, nutrients, and hormones to cells and eliminate waste products. To start with the structure, we are going to talk about the heart first. Heart is a hollow muscular organ. It's inside the thorax. The space it occupies is called the middle mediastinum. It consists in 3 layers: pericardium, myocardium, and endocardium. Its function is to act like a pump that attracts and expels blood to all body tissues through the blood vessels. It is divided in 4 cavities, 2 in the superior known as right and left atriums, and 2 inferior known as right and left ventricles. It is considered an organ formed by 2 halves, the right side which the deoxygenated blood passes through. The wall consists in 3 layers: pericardium, myocardium, and endocardium. Its function is to act like a pump that attracts and expels blood to all body tissues through the blood vessels. It is divided in 4 cavities, 2 in the superior known as right and left atriums, and 2 inferior known as right and left ventricles. It is considered an organ formed by 2 halves. The right side which the deoxygenated blood passes, and the left through which the oxygenated blood passes. Blood is one of the most important components of the circulatory system. The average volume of blood in human body is 5 to 6 liters. It is composed of a liquid part called plasma, which composes the 55% of the total. 45% is composed by red blood cells or erythrocytes, and 1% by white blood cells or leukocytes and platelets. These cells are produced in the red bone marrow. Erythrocytes are cells responsible for capturing and transporting oxygen to all parts of the body. For this end, they have their cytoplasm full of protein called hemoglobin. that fulfill that function. Leukocytes or white blood cells are the body defending cells. According to their morphological characteristics are divided into granulocytes and agranulocytes. We have three types of granulocytes. Neutrophils, they are the most abundant leukocytes in the blood. They have an antibacterial function. Eosinophils are in a portion of 2 to 4%. Its function is against parasites. Basophils, they are the smallest leukocytes in the blood, less than 1% its function. It participates in inflammatory reactions. And agranulocytes, we have two types. Monocytes are the most abundant cells in the blood. They transform in macrophages. And lymphocytes, they form 20 to 40% of leukocytes. They are the most important cells of the immune system. As in the other systems that we learn, there are some diseases that can affect the circulatory system. For example, atherosclerosis is the formation of plates of lipids in the interior of one or several coronary arteries. Hypertension is an elevation of blood pressure levels. The normal level of the pressure is 120/80. Leukemia is an alteration of the cells in the bone marrow that give rise to white blood cells. The last system that we are going to learn this stage is the immune system. Its function is to recognize between the own and the not own. Comprises a group of cells, tissue, and organs. It is related to immunity, that is a response against an infection agent. There are two types of immunologic responses: innate, which is the first line of defense, and its components are physical barriers, cellular components, and proteins, and the other type is the adaptive, which is characterized by a delayed response. It has memory, that means it's capable to recognize pathogens. Its components are T and B lymphocytes. The cells that are part of the immunological system are organized in lymphoid organs and tissues. These organs are classified according to their function in primary and secondary. Primary lymphoid organs are the medulla and thymus. Their function is the production and maturation of the lymphocytes. And the secondary, which include lymph nodes, spleen, tonsils, and mouth. Their function is the recognition of pathogens and the production of an immune response. One way to prevent some diseases are the vacuums. The WHO defines vacuum as any preparation intended to generate immunity against a disease by simulating the production of antibodies. There are some diseases that can affect our immune system, for example, allergies, which is response of an organism when exposed to a substance that usually produces no reaction. And the autoimmune diseases, here the immune system may be unaware of its own. There are so many diseases of this kind. Lupus is one of the most known. This occurs in young women. The immune system produces antibodies against different cellular components. I hope this video helped you to understand how our body works. Just remember, check Nexus. There are some activities that you have to do, for example, the learning evidence. It is also on page 95 of your learning guide. You are going to find the instructions on Nexus too. Remember, you have to work with your team. Thank you!